Welcome to the Over the Hump Podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cottrell, Rachel Cottrell, and Keaton Dodd.
Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Over the Hump podcast. Today I'm your host, Rachel Cottrell, and with us today is one of the legendary red Brahman breeders of our era, Craig Fontenot from Fontenot Red Brahmans in Ville Platte, Louisiana. So welcome, Dr. Craig.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I have to admit, since we started the podcast, you were on our list of people that we wanted to, hear the story of your Brahman involvement and your ranch's history. But since they had announced you as the judge of the World Brahman Congress, we were like, well, no, that's not going to be appropriate to to have him on the podcast. So as soon as the show was over and kind of a little bit of time passed, we wanted to get you on right away. So we appreciate you being on here. So we like to start out by just kind of you giving everybody like a little bit of a rundown of how you got involved in Brahmins, So would you mind just starting with that?
It actually all started on a hunting trip to Llano, Texas that I was too young to go on. It was Cherokee Ranch. Tom Dean had bought Cherokee Ranch from Mr. Cy Yoakum's widow, and Tom Dean sold the ranch, a part of the ranch, to McKellar. When they were separating these cattle, my dad and a couple of my uncles and my older brother and cousins were on the trip. I was too young to make it on that trip. Like I'd said previously, they passed in front and they were cutting these bulls out. So on their way back, they stopped and they purchased, I think it was 7 or 8 bulls that came back to Ville Platte and the surrounding area to put back with the commercial herds. And that's when probably some of the first Brahmins were actually brought back to this area. And my brother Chad showed that first time. I think that was in the mid-70s. And that's when it started. From there, he showed that bull for 1 or 2 years. From there, we went ahead and started looking at getting a registered herd started. And in 76, we purchased 6 registered females from 3X, and that started Fontenot's Red Brahmans.
Oh my gosh. So for maybe people who are like new in the breed, like when I hear Cherokee Ranch or I hear 3X, like I know like that's legit foundation stock, but maybe some of our new listeners might not know it. I know, do you remember anything about those ranches or, their history or?
Cy Yoakum was probably, in my opinion, one of the better breeders back in the late 60s, early 70s. Him, along with Clearford Brothers, probably Cabela, Triple B, they all started different bloodlines. To me, my personal opinion, looking back at all the pedigrees, and the bloodline that stood the test of time more than any would have definitely been Cherokee Ranch. If you look at it, it goes back to the basis of the H.K. Henry Clay Kuntz's ranch, 3X, Miss Emily Dahl, which were brothers and sisters, along with Miss Massey, Bob Massey's wife. They all originally from the same family and all got started in the Brahman deal, more or less brought up into it with, I think it's Mr. Henry's great-grandfather. You would probably know more about it than me. And it was definitely stood the test of time. Some of the premier Red Bulls and females from today trace back to those bloodlines.
Not to do a history of them, but would those have been cattle started from that like 1940s Mexican
46 importation, yes.
Yes. Okay. It's the picture in the book of the Brahman where they're crossing over the bridge from Mexico.
Yes, those 46 bulls, correct.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome.
Roman history book. That's where most of those bloodlines originated. There's a few reddish tinged or red bulls in there, and that's what it went ahead and started the red bloodline of what's known as the American Red Brahman today.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those were gray. There wasn't a whole lot of difference in features back then.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was breeding for the same thing, which is beef characteristics, bone, muscling, volume. That kind of changed later in the 80s. We'll get to that later on. But that's where we got our start from 3X. We also bought some heifers from 3X. Next purchased, we bought some from Dr. Woods, James P. Woods in Waynesboro, Mississippi, which many of y'all might see Marshall around now. That was Marshall's dad.
Oh, okay.
Me and Marshall kind of go way back. I could tell you some stories about Marshall, but I probably won't. Back at the World Congress when he was in Houston
In 84?
in 84. Yeah, I was still in high school, and he was pretending to be in high school, and I think he paid for it dearly the next morning. But it was good times.
Oh my gosh.
We bought some more heifers from V8 when they had reds, when they had the Christmas tree brand, I guess I would call it, on their side a long time ago.
Yeah.
I don't know what's the history of that brand, but I think that was your grandpa that started that.
Maybe unless you're talking about he called it the triangle T, but I don't know it.
Triangle T. I always call it a Christmas tree. Looked like a little kid drew a Christmas tree.
I think he called I've seen old ads in it, and he called his ranch Sloan Williams and Son. And it's fun to look back at those old ads and think about all the history there.
Yeah, because if you go back and you look at a lot of those ads, they had a lot of speckled cattle back then, which is kind of frowned upon today. But I guess that was really didn't matter in those days, because if you go back and you read the Brahman history book, the guy I previously mentioned, Mr. Cy Yoakum, his philosophy was always don't look at color, breed the best to the best, and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Which works very well back then, but today it's the dark cherry red color that sells, that everybody knows, that everybody's trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the gold standard as of today's market.
Yeah.
And it just kind of grew and evolved from there. We bought some from HK, Henry Clay. I know you had Claude on a couple of months ago. That was very interesting. I loved hearing that recording that y'all closed that podcast out with,
Yeah.
because we had made many trips down there, and it was always, you definitely see the best red Brahman cattle in the world, and you never knew what to expect or who you would visit, who you'd meet up on that ranch.
Yeah. Oh, so did you personally get to visit Cherokee Ranch and 3X Ranch and HK Ranch?
Cherokee, I did not. 3X, I did several times, driving through those pastures with this Emily in her Cadillac, because her favorite saying was that you always want to show cattle in a low vehicle, because when you drive up to them, those cattle look so much bigger.
The wealth of knowledge here that we're getting.
I'll never forget that. We traveled through, and those pastures were not improved pastures like you see today. But we'd go through there with her old Cadillac, and she was a unique individual also.
Yeah.
She was, I think, one of the first women to ever judge a show. Maybe the first on the board of directors, but she broke a lot of barriers for women, not only in the Brahman breed, but in the cattle world.
Yes, I think she's amazing. Just her story and courage and expertise,
We did visit Henry Clay a lot. That was always very interesting. We'd go over there and we'd see they had, the ceilings were very, very tall in that house, and they were covered with pictures. I remember that. And you would go and you'd see some of our neighbors that had been there before, and next to them you might see some movie stars. I don't know if you remember one ad he had when he had the back cover of the journal. It was Brooke Shields when she was probably a teenager, one of the top models in the country. She had her in a bunch of pictures with all his red Brahman cattle. It was,
Oh my gosh, we got to go find that one. No, I don't remember that at all. Oh, that's awesome. So you were dating Brooke at the time, and that's how y'all got together?
Not quite. So
So when did y'all start, I guess, showing or, showcasing cattle with your own brand? I guess tell our listeners what that brand is and how y'all got that name.
the brand it's a C with the F, like a 3/4 square with a F in the middle of it. I think they originally got that brand. My dad started with that brand, but when him and his father were in the commercial cattle business together, they had the C with the P because his name was Percy. And they just cut the P off and they made the CF. Earl and Percy were in partnership with some commercial cattle. Chad has that brand at his house. I saw it yesterday on his back porch, in fact. And funny, if you really go back in a lot of the family history, my grandfather Percy, he was in the cattle industry in the Brahman deal probably in the 50s. He had bought a bunch from the Marceaus at the time. 50s. It had to be the 50s.
Red or gray?
Gray. It was all from Mr. Aubrey Marceau down in Kaplan.
So I know that you were one of the founding members of AJBA. I can't remember exactly when AJBA started, but you probably do.
We started showing our own brand, probably cattle from our own herd, I would say in the mid 70s. AJBA was founded in 1980. I was still in elementary school. I remember the first show well. It was in Baton Rouge. Mr. Neil Potter judged the show. Our neighbors, the Morkentel, Doug Morkentel, Mr. Butch Morkentel's son, had champion heifer that year. And I think Judd might have had champion bull, and Tammy was champion showman. In fact, Tammy is what we're talking about. And she was champion showman, I believe, the first 2 years. She was the first two-time showmanship winner of the All-American.
Okay, so you were in elementary school, you said, at the first All American.
Yep.
And I mean, gosh, have you been to almost every All American since?
Most of them. I missed a few while I was in vet school, but I would say I've probably made it 85% of them for sure.
Wow. So I remember that when my first All American was the 87 All American. And how old would you have been then? Was that there was in Angleton? Was that your last year?
That was in Angleton. I remember it very well. I was in undergraduate at LSU in animal science because I wasn't supposed to make that one. And my cousin was in an auto accident and lost his life. So we came back from the funeral. And from the funeral, I remember going to Angleton in 87. And if I'm not mistaken, you had champion heifer that year.
I did. Mary Poppins.
Yep. I remember that very, very well.
So I would have been 8 years old at the time, and my first shows, and my dad told me to go sit in the stands and to watch your sister and Leslie Broussard and just watch them, and that they were the best showmen, and just to watch them and learn from them. And so they were like my heroes. And I think I've told you this many times, but there was a picture, I believe it was you on the cover of the Brahman Journal, like maybe you and Gordy leading.
It was actually twice. First time they had the picture of it, of us exercising the cattle. I think that's in Beaumont, if I remember right.
Okay.
And then a couple of years later, they just had the sketch of that same photo.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, as a little kid, I was like, those kids, those guys are badass. Sorry for my language.
I promise you, no one ever told anybody to watch Craig Fontenot's show for showmanship.
No, my dad did not tell me to watch you.
Oh, I know that. My brother and my sister won a lot. I was lucky enough. All my children won a good bit. I think I won one class.
No, it was for sure Vicky, not you. But just just good memories,
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to put this one on there or not. You may want to edit this one. And I think I told you this story before. The first time I met you was we went to your grandpa's house. We stayed in Rosenberg. You must have been 3 or 4 years old. We pulled up. We slept in Rosenberg. We got there early that morning because I remember your grandfather's house well, where you'd go under the garage and walk in the door, and his office was right there. And it was a kind of a long deal hallway. There were a bunch of cabinets on the left, His desk and a sofa was down on the right, kind of against the wall. And you had walked out. It was, I guess, 8 o'clock in the morning. You must have been 3 or 4 years old, if that old. You walked out. You still had your pajamas on, carrying a blanket that you slept with, I'm sure. And I don't remember who it was, but somebody introduced you and they said, tell them what we have in Louisiana. And that's when y'all had the Mayo 257 bull and Mr. Gordon Guillot's. So that would date it right there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that would have been like 84, 83. So I would have been like, or maybe we have to look it up. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you remember this or not, but Blaine Guillot was my boyfriend when I was 4.
I still see Blaine quite a bit.
Oh my gosh. So, okay, so were you on the AJBA board?
I was on the board for a couple of years, and I was vice president for 2 years when George Tullis was president for 2 years. That must have been probably 84 and 85. And 85 was the year that was in Lufkin. That's the year they voted to separate the red and the gray Brahman show because the first All Americans were all together.
Oh, okay. So you would be one of the first people that we've been able to talk to about this because you were there firsthand for the separation of red and gray. As a red breeder, how did you feel about it?
They were on their way back from the meeting. Mr. Henry Kuntz was very much against it at first, but they had a meeting. I'm not sure where the meeting was, but it was during the All American, I believe, that him and Mr. Joe Dahl had attended, and Mr. Joe was Miss Emily's husband at the time, and they got in a car wreck, and that's when Mr. Henry was killed. Coming back from the meeting, the first All American, I bet you there wasn't 10 red females in there because I remember I had a red female and she actually won her class. We were lucky enough to win a class of the first one. And then I guess it split probably 86, 87, somewhere in there. And it's continued to grow as everybody knows it today.
Yeah. So at that point, did your family have an opinion on it either way?
We were kind of for it in a way. It really didn't make a whole lot of difference because at that time in the early 80s, that's when they started importing a lot of these other red cattle that had a lot of features, where a lot of these guys are breeding for the roll head and the long bell ears. They weren't nearly as interested in as the beef characteristics. They were more interested in features. And that's why so many people were against it at first because they thought the red would have gone more to that way. And it actually didn't. So it actually turned out to be something pretty good. But I'm going to go back to when those cattle started coming in, they had a lot of breeders that completely forgot. And a lot of those guys are not here anymore. Those genetics just didn't stand the test of time.
Would these have been like Indo Brazil type genetics?
Into Brazil, the gear is 100% of that bloodline. But if you go back, the thing that stands out to me the most, I'm going to go back to Mr. Henry Kuntz. He had an ad in the journal at the time. It's the early 80s. I'm not sure what it said verbatim, but it's equivalent to if you think you can put the features or the roll head and the long ears on a red Brahman and still maintain the beef characteristics, you're about as foolish as you are to think you could put the head of a jackass on a thoroughbred and win the Kentucky Derby.
Oh my gosh.
That was in the journal.
So I'm going to predict that a bunch of people join up for that online breeders or magazine club of the Brahman Journal so they can go find these ads.
And we have them all the way back to the early 70s. So a lot of times when I go to Mom and them's, I'll pull them out and just go back and look at them and just read the ads because it's very informative and very interesting, some of the stuff that people have said. And the way the history of the red breed and the gray breed, for that matter, has evolved.
So you said initially Henry Clay Kuntz was against separating the shows.
I'm pretty sure he was against separating it at first, and they had a hard time convincing him. But once they convinced him, because he was the leader of the Red Brahmins at the time, and when they finally convinced him to go ahead and, yeah, it would be a good thing, and that's when him, Mr. Joe Dahl, and them had the meeting, and that's when the ABBA agreed to separate it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I need to pull up my spreadsheet of the national and international champions before it got split, but the first, I've got it up because I have a spreadsheet for this. The first Houston show was in 82, and the champion bull was Red Mayrow, which, I mean, I don't know. Is he red or gray?
He actually, I think, 3/4 red, because we bought going back, that's the one I couldn't think of. We bought a lot of cattle from Mr. Ruben Marone at the time, too. He had probably one of the first ones that was crossing a lot of red and gray. So most of those cattle were probably 3/4 red and quarter gray, and I think that's what 257 was. He's out of the 766 bull, and I think he was out of 111 daughter, if I'm not mistaken.
So this is in the bull show. Red Mayrow was champion, and I think this is the millionaire, Mr. America 61/9.
Correct.
He was reserve.
So they had two of them.
Yeah, the Red Bulls beat the Gray Bulls at the first Houston. And then it looks like the next couple of years it was Gray Bulls, but I think that's an interesting fact, that the Red Bulls won.
Yeah, because if you go back and you look, if you spreadsheet in front of you, I think it's 76, the national show.
Okay, let me pull it up. I need to send you the spreadsheet. 76 national show, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Champion Red Bull.
You're good. Okay, it says Bevo IB 432/1.
Okay. When was 359 the champion Red Bull?
The next year.
The next year. Okay, it was one of those.
Yeah, BB 359. Did you call that Triple B?
Triple B. Yeah, that was Mr. Ben Fitzgerald that had it. Mr. Dean Blackwell kind of ran that place for him. But they were somewhere in Texas. I remember flying over there to look at some cattle. We rented a plane. It's some guy with a banking deal that Daddy knew, and he told us to take his plane, and we went over there with Clyde Gudo, and that was a very impressive place too, because they raised the Triple B 359 and the 61 with Dr. Woods in Mississippi, both made famous. For both those boats became famous with the Dr. Woods.
So this is super fascinating because I see these names in my spreadsheet, but I don't know it. But if you look at the national show from 77 to 82, every other year it's almost a Red Bull, because Red Mayrow was one, and then like 81 was a double J Bull, JJ Pancrata. Then 82 was the Millionaire. So they were neck and neck. Like the Reds and Grays were right there competing against each other.
Yes, and that's why a lot of the guys didn't really want to split the show that early. When they started shipping all these other cattle in, they were scared if they would have split the show, the red would have gone down in quality, which it did. A lot of these guys went to the features, the roll head, the ears, and forgot about the bone, the mass, the muscling. But none of those guys are here anymore.
If there's anyone who understands the need for branding, it's a cattle rancher. For 25 years, Ranch House Designs have been crafting custom logos for ranches just like yours around the country. And there's nothing more important than the right logo for building your brand. A logo is the handshake your ranch needs to capture the attention of potential clients and customers. So, turn to Ranch House Designs to make the solid first impression your ranch deserves. Let's get branding your ranch today. Go online to ranchhousedesigns.com.
Well, this was not something we had planned on talking about, but it's fascinating, and I think people are going to love it. Just to hear firsthand, kind of. I had planned to talk about features, but let's talk about it right now, because we know features. When we say the word features, you and I know what that means, but I think, again, a new breeder may not know what we're talking about. So would you explain that?
When these red cattle came in the 80s, they went a lot on features. The head was a really rolled head. It rolled really back on the forehead. The ears were really long, really bell-shaped ears. Some of these cattle were speckled. A lot of them were yellow. But these guys went strictly for the features of the head and the ears and forgot about everything else of what the beef animal's supposed to be like.
I was going to say the muscling was very light.
Yeah, no bone, no muscling.
The frame was very tall, correct?
Yes.
If I see something like that with the features now, I like it. I'm like, oh, that's a old, I like the roll to the tail, or, even on some of our Brahmins, I like a little bit of the roll to the head, I guess nostalgic wise, but I mean, obviously I still care about muscle.
You want muscle, and then you want the broad muzzle, and I understand all of that. You kind of go back to Dr. Bonsworth's deal. But this was completely opposite of what Dr. Bonsworth talked about in his books. He didn't even mention any of this because it had nothing to do with beef characteristics.
Sometimes, even now, you hear the term features pop up in color classification discussions, in looking of whether it's a red or gray, I guess a red animal, features are discussed.
Yes, and it's not supposed to have anything to do with the color classification today. It's supposed to be specifically on 100% color. And
Oh, my bad. My bad. I didn't know that.
going back to the at first when they did the color classification, they went 100% on pedigree and a lot on features. Some people do mention features, but if you look at the red cattle today, they do have a little longer ear to them. Most of them, a little different shape ear, and maybe a little different shape of the head. Maybe not quite as broad as some of the grays, which I much rather a broad head, forehead. But it's just a lot of those genetics where the red got started. I guess that's how it was, but it was like that before they even brought these stuff in from the 80s. When they brought the Indo Brazil and the gear and breeding for the features, the red still had a little different look to them as far as when you look at their head and their ears. And you can still tell it on most of them. Most people, it doesn't bother a whole lot in one way or another. To me, as the beef characteristics are far more important than any of that stuff we're discussing right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can confirm this observation for me or not. We have we're dabbling in some reds. I feel like the hair coat of a red Brahmin is different than the hair coat of a gray Brahmin. And maybe it's just the ones I have, but have you ever noticed that? Like it's almost softer.
It's a little silkier, I was going to say, a little softer. And if you actually go back, and a lot of the Australians that have come here really believe that has a lot to do with fertility. I'm not saying the red's more fertile than the gray, by no means of the imagination. I'm not getting into that.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of the breeders in Australia definitely go on the texture of the hide and the hair.
Yeah. Huh. That is interesting. Yeah.
And if you actually go back and read Dr. Bonsworth's book, he does talk about that.
Yeah, he does. That's very interesting. So, kind of moving into, I mean, a little bit more topics of breeding and stuff like that. Did y'all ever do? We talked about your foundation bloodlines, Cherokee, HK3X. Did y'all ever do any interbreeding of red and gray?
We did when it first started when we bought the Maroon herd. I guess that was probably in the early '80s. I bought some of the Maroon cattle. That's where a lot of our base was from, and that's probably about 3 or 4 years before brucellosis kind of hit everybody. That pretty much wiped us out.
What do you mean by that? I don't know what you're talking about.
The Bangs disease, brucellosis disease.
Yeah, but was there an outbreak or something?
It wasn't really an outbreak, but people wasn't testing for it, or I guess people that would, if you cross state lines, you had to test for it. If you had any type of health papers back then, you had to. They started having a lot of problems. Then they had a federal program dedicated where the states would go, or the federal government would pay the states to go and test your cattle. And if your cattle came up positive, you'd have to sell them for slaughter, and you'd get some type of indemnity, which is like $200 or $300.
Oh,
It wiped a lot of people out.
really?
And that's what really hurt us, set us really back. We lost a lot of the Maroon bloodlines in there. We maintained some. In fact, our better cows today actually go back to those bloodlines, the Maroon bloodlines. So we had the red and gray back then. Then I guess in around the year 2001, 2002, we were looking for something different. The kids are starting to show. We bought a heifer from Steve Hudgens, a Data Pack daughter, out of the Dakota 599 daughter, who was a dark tinged red heifer, super gentle, and we used her. She produced very, very well for us. We still have quite a bit of her cattle, her granddaughters, I guess, or great granddaughters in the herd now. But she was kind of the foundation for all our kids' show cattle.
I remember her. I remember the first time I saw her was at the Kickoff Classic, and I think was Allison showing her.
And it was Austin Shoulder.
Austin.
And she was reserve champion that year as a calf. Alex Dees judged that show.
Okay. I mean, I can still remember her, the picture in my head because she was so thick and so much muscle. That's how I remember her. You know.
Yeah, she maybe wasn't the most feminine heifer in the world, but she had tons of bone, a little tremendous depth and thickness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so cool. Isn't that crazy though? How, I mean, that was in 2001. I would have just graduated college, and I remember standing on the side of the ring up there on the hill at Brenham and seeing her and thinking, man, that's a nice heifer, you know. And now she's, you know, like the foundation of your herd.
Yeah, she's gone now, but we had a good time with her. She was super, super gentle. You could do anything you wanted with her.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for someone who's kind of doing some interbreeding of red and gray?
Definitely stay with the beef characteristics. I think you want to watch your pigment quite a bit. You definitely want black tipped ears, dark muzzle, black vulva. Kind of watch how you breed her as far as the pigment of the sire or bull you're going to breed her to. Because if you happen to get a yellow, to me that's the hardest color to get rid of. It kind of sticks with you. But if you can get a dark red one out of there, I think it helped us. Now I will say right now, I think you have some of these solid red pedigreed animals that are just as good as some of the grays. You look at some of these heifers, like the 8/9 cow that Troy Thibodeau had. She was 100% red, and he bred her to some red bulls. And I think some of those females would have won a lot of shows, kind of like we talked about those red bulls winning the national shows back then.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I mean, yeah, 8/9. If you put her in the gray show, I'm pretty sure she would win. You know, I mean, she's amazing.
Yeah, she was something else. And the amazing thing about that heifer, she was sold at the sale in Shreveport, and they could not get 5,000. They PO'd that heifer for $4,500, I believe.
Wow. With the national show sale?
No, it was a sale that they just had that Mr. Ray Mann had her in the sale, and a couple of others. Pat Cohn had a few others, and Troy and his dad bought the heifer after the sale because we talked about it. Herb Braswell, I think, bought the heifer, and it was just a PO deal at the time.
Wow. So how do you know if a gray bull is going to breed red, or I guess vice versa, you know, like
It kind of goes back to that pigment. You want the black testicles, the black ears, dark points on them.
and then in your experience, like say let's just say a bull like Captain, you know what he looks like. He's pretty much black.
He would definitely breed red. Yes.
Would you say all the time it's going to breed red, or you might get, 25?
If you breed him to the right red female, I'd say 90, 95, 99% of them will be red. I wouldn't breed him to a yellow one because you may get that yellow, but a lot of those yellows are going to still be dark red. But if you dark red female, I think they can all be red.
What kind of, still talking about Fontenot, you mentioned the Fontenot Red Brahmins, bloodline. You mentioned the Hudgens heifer you got, but what have been some of your, more favorite animals that y'all, maybe even of all time in Fontenot Red Brahmins or in recent years?
Well, I'm going to go back and it's going to kind of go against everything I just said. In 93, I believe, we had a reserve bull in Houston with Fontenot 125. We had very good success with him. He sold progeny and semen all over the world. He was, I think, your grandpa judged that year. He was reserve overall behind a Hudson Cattle Company bull that Milton Kranz was running the ranch at the time. But he was a black bull. When it was the wintertime, in the summertime, he was kind of a yellow tinged bull. He was junior champion the year before when they only had 3 divisions when Mr. Johnny Jeffcoat had judged.
So if you're on your phone, you can, if you're a listener, you can Google Mr. Fontenot 125, and there's a video that comes up from Colombia, and you can see the bull. This and I guess, like, to put a frame of reference on it, like you said, that was in 94. So what, 20 years ago? That year, that's funny because you have a good memory, Craig. Like, I'm pulling up my spreadsheet, but it was Dadaw who was the judge. The champion gray bull was Batman. Remember him?
Yeah, and that year, I think it was Jim Nettles that showed him, and that was at the Old Born. And I'm pretty sure Batman put Mr. Jim Nettles in the stands.
Oh my gosh, that bull was scary.
He had a bad reputation, but he had a bad temperament too.
And then, Hudson Cattle Company was champion, and y'all were reserve. Santa Elena won the red female show. That's fun stuff. We went back, not too long. I used to go every Sunday to my grandpa's house, and we would just hang out there. And one day we put in the video of him judging that Houston show and watched it just for fun. And it's crazy to go back and look, though, at the style of the cattle.
Oh, they're different. They're very different.
They're really different.
Another bull that we've had a lot of success with was Mr. Fontenot 311. We had sold half interest in him to Bernardo Vega in Colombia, and semen interest to Eddie Streeter, and it was Lane's Creek Farm in Australia. I can't think of the guy's name right off the bat. I'll think of it after a while. They did very well with him. He won a lot of champions in Colombia. We didn't breed him early on because they brought him. We sold half interest in him. After Houston, Bernardo took possession of him, and then we bred him later on just with semen. They would have semen interest in him, and we started breeding him again, and we're having pretty good success. It's not quite that heavy bone that you see some of these cattle have today, higher birth weights. It's just the right doing kind, in my opinion. Cow lay down, have a calf get up and nurse, a lot of vigor, good color. In my opinion, you get a lot of these bulls today that's winning in the show ring, and I don't know why, but to me, the red is 10 times worse than the gray when you look at birth weights on some of these animals that are winning, especially their SARs. If you go back and you look at their EPDs, it is bad. And we're trying to stay away from some of that. We're trying to stay away from most of that. They win the show ring, but they sure will not win in the pasture. You're losing fertility, you're losing milking, longevity. It's not working.
I was like, what do you consider a manageable birth weight?
For cows, I mean, I have no problem going in the 80s. Some of these bulls will, heifer probably in the 70s. We go a lot on birth weights, especially today. I remember when the All-American was in Perry, Georgia. My wife's son Zachary was showing a bull. George Kemper was checking in, and that's the year they were all talking about, and I think Brandon was the main one, about taking birth weights off the requirement for show cattle, because he kept saying bad data is worse than no data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we checked that bull, and I never even realized it. We just put whatever the scale comes on or the tape comes on, or however we're doing it at the time. That's what we put down. And George looked at the paperwork. He goes, "Damn, I see y'all don't lie about your birth. That bull weighed 98 pounds." But that's what he was. If I'll put that bull weighed 70 pounds, all I'm doing is lying to myself.
Right. Yeah, you have to be honest.
You cannot improve the breed if you're lying to yourself, much less your own herd.
Exactly.
You've got to be truthful with your numbers.
People should y'all should also Google Mr. Fontenot 311 and look at him, because he is an impressive bull, and it says he was born in 2003, so that's over a decade ago, but that's a beefy looking bull.
Very beefy, moderate, not a lot of bone, but ample bone. He was out of the Jimmy Bull, which went back to the 3X. Show me the look, and it was out of a 125 daughter.
So I noticed 311 has horns.
Yep, we always like to leave the horns in the bulls. It to me it's just more masculine, and out in the pasture, it's a pain to work them.
Mm-hmm.
But probably dehorn most of them now. But I personally always rather look with the horns on them.
We always say that we would like to just leave a if we had a herd bull that we knew we were never going to show, and just leave.
Very photogenic out there, very masculine out there with the cow herd.
311 to me has a beautiful head.
Yes, he does.
I mean, beautiful. So, any more recent, any more recent bulls or females that really stand out to you?
We had a bull that we sold as a calf. That, in fact, the sire we owned with Jason Smith, and I remember telling Jason when we weaned that calf, I said this bull has the potential of winning Houston. And he kind of, we just kind of blew it off, and we ended up selling the calf to someone locally, and he actually turned out to be the Rufus bull, the 333 bull that won Houston.
Yeah. Now, you had a bull, you were a reserve at Houston this year, is that right?
Yes, that's Brar's bull, the Fontenot 200. He is out of a smoking gun daughter, a very moderate smoking gun daughter, out of the Rosario 100 bull, which goes back to a lot of HK breeding. He's a passport son. His birth weight was 65 pounds. We talked about it yesterday, and we're going to start getting a lot of calves from him this year.
That is a nice bull.
Yes, very, very impressive.
Very nice bull. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and because we've been talking a lot about Brahmins and love talking about that, but people may or may not know that you're one of the leading beef cattle large animal veterinarians, in the South. And would you share with us maybe just a little bit of that, how you decided to get into being a veterinarian? Where'd you go to school, that pathway?
Well, actually, I grew up on rice and soybean farm and commercial cattle, and I hated the rice and soybeans with a passion. Couldn't stand being on the tractor. And back then there was no cab, it was open cab, dust. Really wasn't open cab, as umbrella. I hated it, but I always loved agriculture, loved the cattle. Wanted to come back home, and I wanted to be my own boss. I loved the science in school, so veterinarian stuck out, and been practicing about 30 years, doing 95% large animal now. Probably about, at this time, it's probably about 75-80% cattle. We have a very big area. In fact, I dread next week. I actually have to go up to Arkansas in this cold weather. Work some cattle up there. The reason we have to do it, it's the dates have already been set for the ultrasound tech that's coming out and doing all the carcass data. So while he does the heifers, we track score, pelvic measure all the heifers, and then we'll preg check a bunch of cows. But I came back home, bought into a clinic, and it just kind of took off from there. And it's been very good. Actually, on the chairman of the the state animal health commission right now, which is very interesting, very informative. Do a lot of the rules and regs of all the diseases in the state. So it's kind of cutting edge, but it keeps you on your toes. It's very informative.
So, like, as a veterinarian, what's your most common thing you have to do? Like, is it, doing a C-section or fertility testing or?
Most of it's all herd health related, where we go and preg check, do dehorning, semen test bulls. When I first started, we did a lot of running around, putting out fires. We had people that had 10, 15 head here, 20 head there. Really had no idea what was going on. Didn't know anything what an EPD was. As time changed, these guys got out of the business. The bigger guys got bigger. They a lot more educated when it comes to selecting genetics. So we don't do very many emergency calls. We do some. We're just lucky enough that our producers have educated themselves. They can do a lot of the stuff, put out the fires themselves. But I would say out of all the problems we see, there's probably about 5 or 6 of us that do a lot of large animal, majority of the large animal in the state, and we talk to each other at least once a week. Everybody thinks we're in competition, but I've talked to 2 of them today. Just different things, shooting stuff back and forth, and we all say that 95% of all the problems we see is nutrition related.
Oh, wow.
uh, Either the cattle are too skinny, nutrition's not right, where you're going to start running into problems. You'll start having diseases, vaccines didn't work, that type deal. That's what most of the problems we see right now is. It's all nutrition related.
I mean, this might be a long shot, but would you say that that also carries over into the show ring?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so. I mean, feet problems can be intensified, fertility problems.
Oh yes, and you get them too fat too early, they're not going to milk. They're not going to want to breathe. They're going to lay fat down in the udder, around the reproductive tract, and you're not getting it out. You get your bulls too fat, you'll have fat around the scrotum, kill your fertility. I think a lot of these fat bulls just have decreased libido. It's a negative cycle.
Yeah.
Very, very negative cycle.
We took a bull to Cattlemen's Congress, and the judge said he needed a little bit more of a fresher show look, and we laughed and we looked at each other because we pulled him up out of the pasture 7 days ago. He's been breeding cows.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, we don't want to lose the fertility. We want them breeding, first, and then being a show bull second.
And everybody tells me I want they always want their animals fatter than I say they are, but I don't. I do not want to have any extra condition on them.
Yeah, I agree. We probably got about 10 more minutes. Ideally, we like it to be an hour, and we have really talked about some fun stuff, but I want to talk a little bit about your leadership in ABBA and your judging experience. So, and those might go kind of hand in hand, but would you kind of also tell us your story of how you first got on the ABBA board, when you started judging, were you on a judging team, anything like that?
We'll start with the judging first. When I was an undergraduate, I started in 4-H on the judging teams here locally, and just being around the cattle. Then I went to LSU and got on the judging team there, and we traveled a lot. Exorbitant. We went to Dixie Nationals, a couple of places in Texas. We might have gone to Louisville. I think our biggest one was Exorbitant in Nebraska, and that's where most of it got started. One of them that I'll never forget was Dixie Nationals. I guess I was just on that day except for one class. I had pretty much aced everything. Reasons were all 48, 49. And there was one steer class in there. And if the cuts are 5, 5, and 5, and you place the class backwards,
Oh,
you know what your score is going to be?
I don't know. 20?
A 5. A 5.
Okay.
That one threw me. I'll never forget that.
Oh my gosh.
And from there, it just kind of grew from the judging team. We started judging in the local shows where they get judging team members to go. And it just kind of grew, then got on the ABBA approved list, and started out in Tennessee, I think Nashville, and a couple of smaller shows in Texas. Did the TJBA, and that's when it kind of kicked off for me. The TJBA was in Nacogdoches that year. And then after that, they kind of got me to go to Fort Worth a couple of times, Waco. I think I did the national twice. Went to Mexico, Panama, Thailand a couple of times. Supposed to go to Honduras at the end of the month, do one there. And lucky enough, did the World Congress in November. That was by far the biggest. But I think the vet work definitely goes hand in hand with that, because after 30 years of looking real quick to try and find the problem, you pretty quick to notice the abnormal compared to the normal. So it helps with that a lot.
Well, I mean, I'll just share this story for our listeners. We at the World Congress this year, that little bull that was calf champion, he had a little scratch on his front leg, and yes, Charlie. Yeah, what happened there? But a lot of people may not even notice a little scratch like that.
It that catches your eye more than anything after you've been doing the vet work for so long. And then as the judging kind of picked up, my dad was big on the board, I guess, in the 90s. Interesting fact there was he was the first president of ABBA that came up where his kids, he got involved with ABBA because of the Junior Association. He was the first one that where his kids got involved with AJBA, and then he kind of got on the board and worked his way up. And then I kind of followed in his footsteps and lucky enough to serve for president and was the first AJBA member to serve as president of ABBA.
Oh, that is cool. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah, so the junior association did our family very, very was very good family overall.
Your dad's career was in banking, is that right?
Started out as a farmer, uh, and then in the 70s they opened up a bank in town. I think 75, 76, and he started the bank as president. Stayed there, and I guess they sold that bank probably 8, 10 years ago. I don't exactly remember when. And then after that, he just retired. Did While he was at the bank, we still did a lot of farming and the cattle, and just kept on there. We still have the farmland that we lease out to farmers today, and where they do. It's no more soybeans; it's all rice and crawfish.
Hmm, that's awesome. Okay, I have a question. You might can help me because I pulled up my spreadsheet of national champions, and I'm missing the year that you judged. I'm missing the champion bull. I've got the champion cow. Um, do you remember? Do you have it the champion gray bull or red?
I could tell you the Red Bull, but I don't remember the Gray Bull.
I don't have it. I need to go back and look because that's one line that I'm missing.
The Red Bull was redneck
Okay, okay.
on the Triple Crown.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so the year before you judged in '07, the year before the national champion was Mosley, and the year after was Elmo. So that's kind of the
It might have been the, I think it's a Ferguson Bull. It might have been the Hawk Bull. I'm not sure.
nope, that was in 2009. Okay, we're going to have to look this up because that's going to stump me.
As soon as I get off of here, I will go look it up myself.
Yeah. And see who it was. It was at Waco. I mean, I remember it.
So the red heifer was Renee, JY Ranch.
Okay.
Uh, that cow went on to produce a lot.
Would it have possibly been Mosley? Was he a two-time?
It might have been Mosley.
Because did Mosley win the World Congress in 2008?
It could very well have been Mosley.
It could have been. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look that up. That is fun stuff. So, do you have a favorite show that you've ever judged
The World Congress by far.
this year? That was a big show.
Just because of the size of the show and the prestige.
And I have to say, I mean, I don't know if you listen to Stuart and my wrap up, the pace of your judging was perfection.
I try to give everybody a good look, but not drag it on.
Mm-hmm.
To me, if you're dragging it on, it's like you're not sure what you want, or you're trying to beat an animal you really like. If you know what you want, you go and you pick it and you roll with it.
Mm-hmm. It was I can say it was a pleasure to exhibit in that show because it was, good pace, easy to listen to the reasons, not a bunch of fluff, just real world talk.
I appreciate it. I just try. I don't really talk all the animals because I think by that time people aren't listening anyhow.
Yeah. So we're at 55 minutes. I don't know if you've.
No, I didn't think I'd better do an hour. Be honest.
I mean, we could still go for another half hour, but I know we like to try to keep it at an hour. So I have two questions that we like to wrap up with. If there's nothing that nothing else we need to go on. So, and you don't have to answer it, but the first one is, do you have any pet peeves in the Brahman business?
Yes, a very big one. Social media. Just and it's two-part social media, and everybody in the breed knows we have problems with the calves nursing and all this other stuff. But people putting pictures of making a calf nurse, and if you try and work for your udders, I think there needs to be a little bit more of that as far as quality of the udder and teat size, and just all the bashing everybody does to each other. If they can get all this negative attention or negative focus po- turned to a positive, it's unbelievable where this breed could be. And I don't say everybody has to agree. That's not what I'm saying at all, because that's what this world, this country is built on. But being able to agree to disagree and still get along, that's the main thing. And all the negative posts that you see about people making calves nurse, just a lot of jealousy and greed in the breed.
Yeah. We did not we did not even talk about this, but I'll just touch on. Do you remember when you and I were on the youth committee together and we put on the All Americans, like you, me, and Chris? We had so much fun.
Yes, and that fact, that's where the F1 deal in the All American came out of. Was you were?
That's right.
I think we're in Fort Worth. The numbers were down because they'd gone to Oklahoma so many times, and maybe to one other state, probably Arkansas, Fort Smith. And we were looking at ways to kind of bring the numbers up and kind of keeping in the hub of the Brahman world between Louisiana, Texas, and maybe a little bit of Mississippi. And then that's when we came up with the idea of the F1s, throwing them in there, just trying to get the numbers up.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun and we did a lot of good stuff. So I like, do you remember any of the protests we used to have to rule?
Oh, yes. Very,
We should not mention those, but we had quite a few.
they had a lot. Man, I think it gets more and more every year.
Yes.
And I go back to the same thing as jealousy and greed. I mean, what some people do for a ribbon is ridiculous.
Yeah. Those were always fun.
Yeah.
So, last question is who or I guess what is your favorite Brahmin of all time? You know, past or present? You raised him, somebody else raised him. Who's your favorite?
If I had to go back and to where I can look at one, and I think one bull or female that did more good, I'm going to say for the red industry, because that's what we focus on mainly here. I'm going to surprise a lot of people. It would probably be Cherokee Vernon 489, that Cy Yoakum bred, because I've seen all the bulls in the 70s and 80s. Like we talked about 359 and won the National Millionaire. I've seen all those. I've seen their progeny. Cy Yoakum always said 489 produced more herd bulls in a single season than any other bull. And I know that was a long time ago, but what we're forgetting is there was no embryo transfer down there and very, very few artificial inseminations.
I was just about to say that because I don't have a picture of that bull in my head, so I Googled it too, and there's a nice one that comes up.
Not the darkest colored bull, but a lot of muscle, a lot of bone, maybe a little longer sheath back then. But to me, he did more for the red breed than any other bull that ever came along.
Yeah, that is cool.
He started, and if you go back and you look at most of these old pedigrees, you'll trace back to him 4 or 5 times.
It's an impressive. Do you have any idea? The page I found, it doesn't show his birthday or era, but would he have been in the 70s?
I think he's 74, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had like 150 progeny. And the most amazing thing about this bull, and we never even talked about back then, which I'll just touch on real quick before we wrap it up. His first 2 breedings, he was bred in Texas by Cy Yoakum. His first 2 breedings were at Sugarland in Florida.
Really?
Back then, these breeders leased a lot of bulls back and forth, which I would not recommend today with the biosecurity and all the problems you have today. You know, you have to do a lot of testing. But back then, they, like Mr. Henry and Cy and a couple of others, they exchanged a lot of herd bulls. But that bull spent his first 2 years at U.S. Sugar.
Oh, that's cool. So this is the great thing about this podcast and getting to hear people's stories is that there's you can learn so much history that you didn't know and from great operations of the past that, you know, are so important to our breed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I I I really appreciate you being on this podcast. It's been great. It's been wonderful.
Oh, I enjoyed it. I can do this.
I know. Well, we might have to do a part two if we think of a topic of we could just have a part two and do it again because like hearing the history of different ranches and so much of the Red Brahman history, it's amazing, you know.
They definitely need to do a part 2 of the book. I know we had talked about it at one time, but they definitely somebody has to do that.
Oh, I know. Well, the book that they just came out with ABBA was really good too, but a little bit more history. I'm all for it.
Yeah, bring it up. Yeah.
Well, so I guess as we wrap up, we'll just say thank you so much. And one thing, if people want to, we like to also wrap up with a little bit of, free publicity for your ranch. So, if people want, do y'all sell private treaty? Do y'all sell semen?
Private treaty and semen. We don't sell any embryos, but private treaty and semen, no problem. Just you can look at the webpage and there's an email address and phone numbers on there.
Yeah, FontenotRedBrahmins.com. So, all right, Dr. Craig, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thanks again for listening to Over the Hump.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Cottrell. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.